Out in the scorching Texas sun, two massive Boeing 747-8s sit motionless on a lonely airstrip. Not flying, not testing, just waiting. Their white fuselages, now faded with time, were once destined to carry passengers across continents. Instead, they've become the most expensive lawn ornaments in America. These aren't just any commercial aircraft. These are supposed to be the future of Air Force One, symbols of American power, mobility, and prestige. But for now, they're just two silent giants roasting in the heat, collecting parking fees big enough to fund an entire fleet of private jets. And yet, every single morning, they're still there, motionless. Their wings sag a little more each day, weighed down not by gravity, but by billions in budget overruns, technical disasters, and political controversy. This wasn't supposed to happen. The plan sounded solid on paper. Back in 2017, two brand new 747-8s, originally built for the now-defunct Russian airline Transaero, suddenly became available at fire sale prices. The U.S. Air Force moved fast, snapping them up before anyone else could. It looked like a stroke of luck. Two nearly complete aircraft, perfect for transformation into next-generation presidential planes. Just a few tweaks, some high-tech additions, and a paint job, and boom! New Air Force Ones ready for service. Then came the infamous handshake. In 2018, President Trump made a deal. Boeing would build the two new VC-25Bs, what the Air Force calls these modified aircraft, for a fixed price of $3.9 billion. It was a bold move, no open checkbook, no unpredictable defense spending, just a flat deal. Boeing gets $3.9 billion, and America gets two state-of-the-art flying fortresses. That agreement instantly turned a national security project into a high-stakes gamble. Fixed-price contracts sound clean and disciplined, but in aerospace they are notorious for hiding risk instead of eliminating it. Every unknown becomes the manufacturer's problem, every delay turns into a financial wound, and every new requirement lands without a matching dollar. At the time, optimism filled the headlines, but uncertainty filled engineering offices. Presidential aircraft are never finished designs, they evolve with threats, technology, and politics. Encryption standards change, defensive systems get upgraded, new vulnerabilities appear without warning. Yet the price was frozen as if nothing would change for a decade. What looked like discipline to the public felt like handcuffs to the people building the planes. Engineers quietly worried that the contract rewarded speed over realism. Managers worried that saying no was no longer an option. And somewhere between the boardroom and the factory floor, the program stopped being a prestige win and started becoming a pressure cooker. Each new briefing carried the same unspoken tension. How much more can be added before the math collapses? In theory, the risk sat with Boeing. In reality, it sat with every team asked to do the impossible, faster, cheaper, and without failure. The deal locked expectations in place while the world kept moving. And once that door closed, there was no graceful way to reopen it. From that moment on, the project wasn't just about building aircraft anymore. It became about surviving the consequences of a promise made too confidently, too publicly, and too early. But behind the scenes at Boeing, some engineers were already sweating. A fixed-price deal might sound great in a press release, but what happens when the whatever-it-takes mindset runs headfirst into a budget that doesn't budge? Reality kicked in the moment those jets rolled into Boeing's San Antonio Modification Center. Turning a passenger airliner into a nuclear-proof command center isn't just about adding a few fancy gadgets. It's a full teardown. The entire aircraft gets stripped to bare metal. Miles of hardened wiring get threaded through airframes that were originally designed for champagne service and in-flight movies. Aerial refueling capability had to be bolted on. No small task, especially when that fuel might need to be transferred at 400 knots in turbulent air. EMP shielding was added to protect the electronics from nuclear blasts. Missile countermeasures, secure communication systems, a medical suite, and even plumbing for a presidential shower were installed. Piece by piece, the simple bargain started to look a lot more like a gold-plated boomerang. Then came the invoices. Just 1 year after the contract was signed, Boeing had to quietly report its first 9-figure charge against the project. The losses kept coming. By mid-2024, they had already passed $2.4 billion, and the jets hadn't even flown yet. Investors, once confident that defense contracts would be Boeing's safe harbor after the 737 MAX crisis, began to panic. Behind closed doors, the mood at Boeing shifted from anxious to grim. What began as a badge of honor, a chance to deliver the world's most iconic aircraft, was quickly becoming a financial sinkhole. Every quarterly earnings call turned into a balancing act between damage control and muted optimism. Executives began fielding tough questions from shareholders who couldn't understand how a project with just 2 airplanes was bleeding billions. Some wondered if the prestige was worth the punishment. Others questioned whether the company had underestimated the scale of what it had taken on. The fixed-price deal meant that every overrun hit the bottom line like a hammer. There was no bailout, no adjustment clause, no easy out. Each setback, a supplier going under, a part failing certification, or a software integration taking months longer than expected, became another log on a fire that wouldn't go out. For Boeing, the defense division was supposed to be the stabilizer, the counterweight to the turbulence of its commercial side. But instead, this project was shaking investor confidence at its core. Even longtime stakeholders, used to weathering rough skies, started to wonder just how deep the hole would go. And with the jets still grounded, every loss felt like burning money on a runway to nowhere. It got worse. One of the key interior contractors, GDC Technics, went bankrupt. Boeing had to scramble to find a replacement, losing an entire year while custom cabin mock-ups gathered dust. Another delay, another pile of costs. Then came the labor issues. A machinist's strike in 2024 froze critical parts of the supply chain. Technicians working in the brutal Texas heat had to rotate tools between air-conditioned tents just to keep adhesives from failing in the summer sun. Every missed day meant penalties. Every penalty shaved more off Boeing's already vanishing margins. Meanwhile, politics did what politics does. President Trump wanted a bold new paint scheme. Red, white, and navy blue. It looked patriotic. It looked sharp. But Air Force engineers weren't impressed. The darker underbelly raised serious concerns about overheating the cabin in nuclear survival mode, and that's not a minor issue. The cooling systems would have to work overtime, increasing energy loads and reducing reliability in the one scenario where the plane absolutely cannot fail. By 2023, President Biden scrapped the new livery and returned to the classic Kennedy-era robin's egg blue, but darkened the shade just enough to confuse photo historians for decades. The argument over paint may have felt cosmetic, but the jets still sat unfinished. Their shells stayed in primer gray. The public argued over colors while the aircraft's real problems went nowhere. And then Qatar lobbed a diplomatic grenade. In 2025, the Qatari Royal Fleet gifted a fully fitted Boeing 747-8 to former President Trump. A gift, they said, a gesture of friendship. But to many, it looked like something else entirely, a way around Boeing's never-ending delays, one that could cost taxpayers billions in retrofits and raise serious questions about foreign influence. Trump shrugged it off with a smirk, calling it dumb to turn down free metal. Congress wasn't laughing. The investigation started almost immediately. Back in the Pentagon, a different kind of frustration was brewing. The original delivery date was 2024. Then it slipped to 2027. Now, some internal memos were quietly whispering about 2029 or even later. Contingency plans were being drawn up, leasing 777s or even using an Airbus A350 retrofitted with U.S. communication systems, just to keep the president flying in something that wasn't pushing 40 years old, because that's the other twist in this saga. The current VC-25s, the iconic blue and white 747-200s that have served presidents for decades, just keep flying. Perfect takeoffs, smooth landings, reliable missions. Their performance has been so flawless that some pilots swear they'll outlive the rest of the fleet, but that reliability comes at a cost. Every smooth mission makes replacing them seem a little less urgent. Every uneventful sortie gives Congress another excuse to tighten the purse strings. And in aviation, nothing fails quite like success. But while the outside world sees majestic aircraft and sunset photo ops, the truth inside the VC-25Bs tells a different story. Step on board, and there are no conference tables, no executive suites, just dangling wires, exposed insulation, and post-it notes marking future antenna placements. It feels less like a high-tech aircraft and more like a partially built movie set. From a distance, it's impressive. Up close, it's fragile. The financial side isn't any prettier. Some analysts now estimate that total program losses could top $5 billion before the first test flight even happens. That pushes the project's break-even point into fantasy territory. Shareholders, once eager for military work, now listen to earnings calls in total silence, dreading the next ugly surprise. And yet, in early 2025, a glimmer of hope emerged. Boeing and the Air Force began floating a radical idea: strip down some of the wish list items, fast-track software certification, and treat the VC-25B less like a blank canvas and more like a survivable upgrade. Some call it desperation, others call it common sense, because Air Force One isn't just an aircraft. It's theater, it's diplomacy, it's a flying symbol of American leadership wrapped in polished aluminum and Pratt & Whitney engines. Every photo of a president waving from the stairway, every ramp-side handshake, every humanitarian mission, that's soft power, airborne. And that's exactly why these delays hurt, because myth runs on momentum. And when momentum stalls, the story begins to fray. But legends also forgive. If the VC-25B finally lifts off in 2029, cutting through the dawn sky in that familiar blue and white, cost charts may fade into the background. School kids will still cut out photos for classroom posters. The public will still point to the sky when they hear its roar. And maybe, just maybe, the aircraft itself will outshine the scandals it was born into. Each future mission will add something that no budget spreadsheet can ever capture: credibility, history, soft power. That's why this project, as expensive and mismanaged as it's been, still matters. Because when Air Force One takes off, it speaks for more than just a president. It speaks for a nation. Still, there's one lesson this saga refuses to let go. A deal scribbled on a napkin can spiral into a 10-year cautionary tale. A journal of ambitions, mistakes, recoveries, and resilience, bound not in leather but in riveted titanium and global expectations. And when its day finally comes, whenever that may be, each thunderous takeoff will be proof that even the slowest, most painful journey can still land exactly where history needs it to. If this deep dive into the troubled skies of Air Force One got you hooked, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for more bold stories just like this. Turn on notifications because what's next might just be even more shocking.